This week on Quality Digest Live, we get the point from Japanese rail workers.
That was clever.
There you go.
All right. Plus an interview with Gordon Stiles of Star Rapid, a China-based prototyping company. That more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 5th, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
Yep, and I'm Quality Digest editor-in-chief, Dirk Ducharme. We ran across a fascinating article this week by Alan Richards called Why Japan's Rail Workers Can't Stop Pointing at Things.
And they do.
And they do.
A lot.
A lot.
Yes.
And if you've ever been to Japan or watched any movies that take place in Japan, you might have seen these white-gloved employees in train stations, you know, pointing down the platform and calling out, sometimes seemingly to no one, just like that, as trains move in and out of the station. And on board, as we saw in that picture, it's much the same, says Richards, with drivers and conductors performing almost ritual-like movements as they review their dials and buttons and screens.
It's almost like train Tai Chi.
It's like train Tai Chi, exactly, which is Chinese, not Japanese. But
and the point.
But I mean, get the point, right? Now, you got to keep in mind, Japan's rail system moves an estimated 12 billion passengers each year with an on-time performance that's measured in seconds. And part of what makes trains run so smoothly and mostly without incident is something called Shiza Kenko. And according to Japan's National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, this involves pointing and calling, and it works on the principle of associating your tasks with physical movements like pointing and vocalizations to prevent errors by raising the consciousness levels of workers. And, you know, as Richards points out, to Westerners, all this pointing and shouting seems a little bit silly, but it has reduced workplace errors by up to 85%.
Wow.
So it may look silly, but it's not so silly. Now we have a video clip here of what that might look like if you've never seen it. So we can just run that clip. So you're going to see, okay, you see the station master. He's pointing down. He's actually checking the track as he's pointing down because there's an incoming train. So the fact that he points down the track and looks is his reminder of what he's supposed to be doing in that job, which is making sure that this train is clear to come in. So you get the idea, and there's actually some. If you go to that article, there's actually some other video clips in there. There's actually one of a station guy pointing at a button on the wall, speaking out, pushing the button, speaking out, pointing out at the button again, probably to acknowledge that yes, I have pushed this button, and then going back into the train. So every motion is pointed to and announced. Now, if you think about what's going on here, in this case, this guy points down the track and he speaks. And in the other case, he points at a button, he speaks, you know, he points down the track, he speaks, and so forth. So any other worker or passenger in the area would immediately know what's going on, even if they weren't looking, okay, they would hear it if they didn't actually see the operation. But also, and this is the critical bit, it's drawing the operator's attention to himself, to what he is doing. I pointed the button. I see the button, I push the button, I point at the button again I just pushed, and I say what I just did. With every gesture and vocalization, I am both reinforcing and reminding myself of what I did, or maybe what I should have done. Now, if you think about this, a lot of times, you know, how many times have you thought, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do this thing, and then after the fact you say, oh, I'm sure I did it. But all you did was think about it.
Right.
By the fact that you think about it and then you point it and say, this is reinforcing that, no, this isn't just something I thought about doing, this is something I actually did, or hopefully did, because now I'm kind of reminding myself. It gets the instruction of the warning out of my head and it connects it to the real world. I point at it and I say something about it. Now I used to do this, actually I didn't even really realize I was doing this. I rode a motorcycle for a long time. Year in, year out, 365 days a year, rain or shine. And anybody who rides a motorcycle will tell you, you're invisible. And you have to assume that nobody can see you because they can't, okay? So one of my little tricks is when I be, let's say, riding through town, like downtown Chico or something, you're always worried about people opening doors in front of you. You know, they don't see you coming, they go to get out of the car and open their door right in front of you. So as I would be driving down the street, if I saw somebody near a car or near an intersection, maybe they're gonna walk out in front of me, I would just point my finger at them. Not, you know, really visible, it's more for my benefit. I would point my finger and go, there's a person there. Oh, there's a person there. Oh, this person might be getting ready to cross the street, right? And the very fact of me just pointing to it and mumbling to myself, hey, watch out for that guy, was really a reinforcement for me to don't just be aware of it, actually acknowledge it by pointing it. And it's really an effective little trick. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's very much a psychological little trick.
It
because,
is.
you know, we all think that, as you mentioned, that when you think about doing something and you say, oh, I'm going to do that, you do it, but you don't always. You know, many times you forget to do whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, I'm sure I did it.
Yeah, right.
Well, no, all you did was think about it.
Yeah, right. But I mean, this is a three-step process. It's the thinking about it, it's the pointing out, it's the saying it, and that all reinforces what you're doing. I mean, in a very high-risk factor, you know, environment like rail, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on that could potentially be a risk. I mean, there's very few accidents, but there could be if it's not a very secure.
And by the way, the MTA is starting, or has been doing this actually, and they picked it up. They picked it up from this. Good stuff. I don't know. For us, it seems silly, but when you look at the results, it's kind of okay.
It's amazing. It'll eventually be a multi-billion-dollar consulting industry here in the U.S. of training
how to point,
training people to point. Hey, you know what?
Money to be made.
There you go. All right, thanks, Dirk. All right. Well, now usually on the show we cover stories that have appeared earlier in the week in the Quality Digest newsletter. Most of you know that, and most of our interviews jump off from recent QD articles. Most of the interviews that we do here on the show. Well, this time we're going to flip the script a little bit and start off with an interview that will act as a teaser for a feature article coming up later from QD's own Ryan Day that'll appear in an issue of Quality Digest coming up in the next week or two. So our guest on today's show is Gordon Stiles, who is the founder and president of Star Rapid. And Star Rapid is a company specializing in rapid prototyping, rapid tooling, and low-volume manufacturing of custom parts. Star Rapid is based in Zhongshan, China, but Stiles is a British engineer who now spends the majority of his time at the company's Chinese facility. How Stiles came to transition from Great Britain to China is an interesting part of the story, but it is only part of the story. There's also a lot here to delve into regarding technological innovation and customer service, in addition to the cultural ramifications of doing business in the East versus the West. So, without further ado, Gordon Stiles, welcome to Quality Digest Live.
Well, I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm racking my brains thinking what I can do in my factory with pointing at things to
exactly
help guys remember their process. So, yeah, great article there. I love it.
Great idea. You know, I mean, you think about that, it's pretty simple, but it makes a lot of sense. Well, now Gordon has mentioned you had an interesting journey from west to east. So what made you not only have your company in China, but decide to live there as well?
Well, I grew up in the northeast of England in a place called Middlesbrough. And if you want to know what Middlesbrough's a bit like, it's a bit like Flint, Michigan without the culture, you know. So it was kind of a declining industrial place. And as an engineer, it was very tough. But I managed to build a business there up for 17 years, up to the year 2000 when I sold that business. And at the time of selling it, we were the largest 3D printing company in the UK at that time, long before most people in the world had ever heard of 3D printing. I sold it, but I then decided I wanted to get back into engineering in the UK. So I got back into engineering again. I invested all of the money I'd made from my first business, but we got hit very, very badly with incoming low-cost Chinese competition. And in the end, I decided to close the business. So at the age of 40, with just about 10,000 bucks left to my name, I decided to kind of, if you can't beat them, join them kind of strategy. I bought a one-way ticket on Air France to Hong Kong, and I just went out there with the intention of starting a business. And that's exactly what I did. So June 2005, started up a Hong Kong-based trading company, went into China, set up in a small bedroom there as a one-man trader, getting 3D CAD models and getting them CNC machined in Dongguan, and then shipping them back to my home country. And one by one, I employed another person after a year and another person. And right now, we have 250 people. We're self-financing all the way through, and we have about 65,000 square feet that we operate out of. So it's been quite a journey. And at first, I wasn't sure it would succeed, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to live or work, live there for sure. But over time, I fell in love with China. I've got married to a Chinese girl, and frankly, I live a very happy life there.
Well, that's an amazing story, and it's really a great success story. I mean, you, of course, now have a very unique viewpoint into this. This is obviously a big issue these days, is manufacturing in China, how people in the West can work with people in the East to get done the work they need to get done. So what would you say, from your unique vantage point, are some of the perceptions and misperceptions maybe about each group and what they think about how the other one works?
Yeah, well, obviously the number one, from an industrial point of view, the number one perception of China is that you only get cheap, poor quality goods from China. But that's clearly not the case, because otherwise people wouldn't be buying iPhones and various other made in China goods that are frankly some of the best quality products made on earth. But it is clear that the number of really high quality companies in China compared to less good quality, it is small, but it is growing. And give them another 15 to 25 years and we'll be talking about China in the way that we talk about Japanese manufacturing today. I'm pretty confident of that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about technological change within your sector, the prototyping sector. How have things changed since you began in the industry?
Yeah, so I began with my first 3D printing machine in 1993. I bought a 3D Systems SLA 250 stereolithography machine. And I think on the plastic side of 3D printing, materials have changed greatly. There is now a huge range of mechanical properties available in materials, different colors, and many different techniques. So that the mechanical properties and the types of materials that are available, that's been a huge improvement. But the one thing that has changed dramatically, certainly since 1993, is the availability of metal components of pretty high quality and very good metallurgy. So even 10 years ago, you couldn't really get good metal parts. And I think it was, I went to a show in Sao Paulo actually and saw some output from a company down there. I think they were using EOS at the time. And it was the first time I saw metallurgy of such high density and also parts that were fairly flat, not buckled, So I was very excited, and that's why eventually we decided to invest in a Renishaw AM250, which is not a sintering machine, it's actually a melting machine, which most are nowadays. And so, yeah, that's the big change. I would say certainly the last 5 to 10 years is the blooming of the metals business.
Well, and from where we've come just in the last couple of years, what do you see in the next several years in terms of where this goes from here now?
Yeah, so on metals is a production technology, whereas plastics historically was very much a prototyping technology. So in the metals industry, I think we're going to have to educate the designers out there who are going to find the right niches for metal 3D printing in low volume manufacturing. Right now we see an awful lot of inquiries which are parts where the geometry is just not suitable for metal 3D printing. They're using it as a bit of a fallback position when nothing else can make their component. It's trying to sweep up behind a bad design, so to speak. So I think the education of designers on what you can and can't metal 3D print. Also, 3D printing needs a lot of skill. Metal 3D printing needs a lot of skill. You have to play with the parameters, and you often don't get the part right first time. So you might have to build a part once or twice or even 3 times to get the geometry right, get the orientation right, get the support structure right. Once you've done that, these machines are very reliable, and you rarely get a build that fails if you've done your development of a part. And so that's why, if you look at all the metal 3D printing machines in the world, you will see that they're employed in low volume manufacturing. And probably the best example of that would be General Electric. They've got hundreds of machines, and they're building turbine blades for jet turbines and for commercial steam turbines. Also NASA, building very complex, convoluted nozzles that just can't be built by any other method. So that's one thing that we're seeing. Another thing that we're seeing is the development of what I call hybrid machines. That is the merging of metal laser melting with some other technology like CNC milling or turning or grinding or EDM. And so DMG Mori have come out with a new machine where it's a milling and turning machine, and it also has a laser, and it creates a conical stream of powder. You can build up the part, and then you can come around and machine it, turn it over, machine the side, and then you can start building again on that machined element. So the whole hybrid development is very exciting for the future. And just as you see milling machines that are turning machines, that are grinding machines, so you'll add 3D printing to that kind of hybrid technology. Very exciting.
And what about service? Is service within your sector, low volume manufacturing, is that kind of a different process than maybe service might be in a high volume?
Well, the lower the volume you are, in rapid prototyping, low volume production, you are effectively a small order business. And there is a disproportionate amount of communication with the clients and project management and so forth. So in a business like ours, we are top heavy on indirects. And that has a direct result of the amount of communication that is required. And I don't think this is going to change going off too far into the future. But there is a great challenge for service. There's a great challenge for the species, frankly, that's looming, let's say, anywhere between 10 years and maybe 35 years down the road, and that is the technological singularity. Imagine a world where you have artificial superintelligence embodied in some kind of robotic device or machine, and it can direct itself. It has its own agency, so to speak. It can decide what happens next. It can decide what products need to be developed or so forth. And it has the capability of doing everything that humans do. And this, of course, is the kind of scary sci-fi stuff. What happens at the technological singularity, I really don't know. I've read a number of books on it. I can't predict it. But I do believe that post or during singularity, there will be a sufficient number of humans who will reject getting their hair cut by a robot, or when they go for a massage, it has to be a real human being, or when they want to buy their, let's say, rapid prototyping or their low volume production, CNC machining, they want to talk to a human. Right. It may be a niche market, but I don't see any future for any company long term that goes down the route of removing humans deliberately from the process where they could remain and add value. If the only thing that you need is money to be able to build a factory and you don't need humans, it becomes a venture capital play, and then anyone with money can get into it, and there is no differentiation and no value added. And that's not a future I personally want to be involved with. So that's why we're going down the route of, yes, we love technology at the core of our business, but we're going to surround it with humans and humanity.
Interesting.
Well, Gordon Stiles of Star Rapid, founder and president of Star Rapid, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you have to catch a plane, so thanks for making the time. And again, look forward to more with Gordon. We'll have an article interview with Gordon coming up here in Quality Digest in the coming weeks. So, Gordon Stiles, safe travels to you. Thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now. That was an interesting interview.
It was. Yeah.
Interesting stuff there.
I love that he just like, I just hopped on a plane, one-way ticket.
Yeah.
Hope it works.
Yeah, it did. It did. Good for him. Good job.
Well, Christopher Martin, Quality Digest sales rep and also freelance journalist, wrote a story this week, Desks on Wheels, about a company I have never heard of, but if you're a gamer, you've probably heard of it. Valve. The company's called Valve. Valve wrote the game Half-Life, among others, considered by some to be among the best video games ever written. Valve is also the developer of digital distribution platform Steam, which is a storefront for PC games of all types that has become so popular that it is estimated to produce about 70% of all digital PC game sales. Yeah, wow. So pretty much a monopoly. So it's a big deal and well-known name in the gaming.
Like it's monopoly.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Valve has about, according to figures I've been able to find, about 360 employees. So it isn't a huge company. It's not Microsoft, but it isn't small either. And so you might expect a company that size, 350 people, you might expect it to have the usual hierarchy, a CEO, a VP, some managers, supervisors, etc. But you would be wrong. Valve is what they call a flat organization. And in Valve's case, we're talking really flat. There are no bosses at all, period. It is so flat that employees don't have set jobs. They don't have a boss, they don't have a workspace or titles or projects or anything. They work on what they want to work on. If a project seems interesting, out of the many projects going on, they literally wheel their desks are on wheels, they wheel their desk over to that group or people that is working on that project, and they start working with them. And if they want to work on another project, they just unplug their desk and roll it somewhere else. Each employee decides how best to use his or her skills to meet the needs of Valve's customers. And that's a critical thing. The word customer shows up many times in their employee manual. Active projects are all determined by the employees as well. Employees regularly get together to discuss new ideas and ongoing projects. And this is another interesting thing, particularly among the software industry. There is no mandate that developers put out a game a year or an update a year. And a lot of software companies work that way. Activision's Call of Duty, for instance, puts out a new game every year. And a lot of software companies do that. And that's their schedule. It's every year you got to put something out because they feel like, well, if you don't, it's going to look like you're not doing anything, right? Yeah, and that isn't the way Valve works. Now, all this has this kind of no boss and flat organization has led to critically acclaimed titles like Half-Life, as we said, the groundbreaking first-person puzzle game Portal, and as I mentioned, the distribution platform Steam. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, a no-boss environment, right. Yeah, right, sure. But in Valve's case, it's actually codified. Here is what it literally says in Valve's employee handbook, which you can download from their site. Under the heading, Welcome to Flatland, the manual says this: it's our shorthand way of saying that we don't have any management and nobody reports to anybody else. We do have a founder or president, but even he isn't your manager. This company is yours to steer toward opportunities and away from risks. You have the power to greenlight projects. You have the power to ship projects. Now that in itself is pretty mind-blowing, but this is the one that really got me. Same manual, a few paragraphs down. This is an actual screenshot from the actual manual. Every company will tell you that the customer is boss, but here, that statement has weight. There's no red tape stopping you from figuring out for yourself what our customers want and then giving it to them. If you're thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds like a lot of responsibility, you're right. And that's why hiring is the single most important thing you do. you will ever do at Valve. Anytime you interview a potential hire, you need to ask yourself not only if they're talented or collaborative, but also if they're capable of literally running this company, because they will be. And the emphasis on you was my emphasis. It is in the manual. You hire people. You interview people. The hiring and firing process and performance review as well is a peer process. There aren't any bosses. Hiring, a group of people said, you know, we need another designer, or we need another artist or programmer. The peer gets together, well, do we need it for this? Is it inside? No, we really need to bring somebody in. They decide, and then they go out and they look, and that person is interviewed by their peers or potential peers, and firing is the same way. Now, obviously, there's an HR side of this, there's legal stuff and all that, but basically, the decision for who gets hired and who gets fired is employees themselves. This is pretty amazing, and actually, there's a lot more in that article. I encourage you to read Christopher's piece. It will give you a good overview of how this company works based on several sources that he mentions in there. But after reading his piece, I really encourage you to download their employee handbook. There's a link to it in the article. It's 30 pages long. It is an amazing read. If you've never even pictured what that kind of environment could look like. By the way, at the very end of it, they're very upfront about it. The CEO is very upfront about it. He says, yes, there are some problems that this causes. Here are things that we don't do well. And he listed at the end, because this kind of environment works great for innovation. Organizationally, it does cause some problems, and they acknowledge that.
Well, that was going to be my question. Was this works for, I think, certain types of organizations, like a gaming company? You can see this working at an old line manufacturing company, you know, spitting out widgets. I did, you know.
Yeah, well, a production company, is different. A software company, unfortunately, they don't run. Some software companies do work like production companies. They say, okay, we're going to put out a product a year. Their model says no. A product should go out when it's ready to go out. We should work on ideas that we think are going to be good, what the customer wants. We go in the direction that we feel as a peer group, and in touch with our customers and the online, the gamers and so forth. We go the direction that we think it should go. It's not decided ahead of time.
See, we're the kind of company that actually can do this, and we actually do have similar type of ideals. But it's hard. There are obstacles. It is hard. We're very small and we're pretty flat. But it's hard to get there.
And you can imagine, like, okay, a company of 7 or 8, 9 people. He's like, you can do that. 350 people. You're going, what? It's like, no boss. I just show up.
Crazy.
I know.
Interesting article. Read that one. Really good one. All right. Well, Dirk, we have a little bit of time here for our off script. This is the section where...
Fortunately, I didn't leave us much, so that's good.
Where Dirk and I throw little things at each other without any preparation. Hopefully the person throwing it has some preparation. Not really in this case. But okay, this one came to you from a familiar place, the world of politics. I love the world of politics, and I always jump off from that into different things. Okay, well, the political world, and our legal system too, is really based on what you could call an adversarial, even a partisan perspective. You know, everybody talks about bipartisanship and cooperation, but really, a lot of these systems, the legal system is based on adversarial, you know, prosecutor and defense, right? And the political system is based on that too. Really, this idea that you have these parties, and from that will come some consensus, hopefully, eventually. And really, that's built into the fabric of the way the society operates. You know, at least as far as politics and law are concerned. But what about business? That's what I wanted to ask you about today. Is that same ideal work in the business world? I mean, there's a lot of chatter about all the time about how it's advantageous to work together and cooperate, everything like that. But Christopher's article just was a good example of that you just mentioned. But I'd argue maybe that there's as much adversarialism going on in the workplace as anywhere else, and maybe that's bad, maybe that's good. And that's what I really want to hear your opinion about. Maybe you can quickly sketch. I want to give you a couple of scenarios. I want you to quickly sketch, you know, what you think about the yin and yang of how it applies to partnership versus partnership.
Well, I can think of one right off the top of the bat.
I have a few.
Okay.
Maybe you can add them at the end. But the first one, management and workers. So where does that fall on the axis of the benefits of partnership versus partisanship?
Well, actually, that's what I was going to talk about. One of the biggest issues that came, and I think it may be a little bit less of an issue now than it used to be, but let's talk about unions.
Yeah.
And when you think about typical labor management, if you talk about unions, that was, I should say, traditionally an adversarial relationship. I think that has changed somewhat. Not everybody would agree with me on that, but I think that has changed somewhat. And my own personal opinion is that at least in that model, the adversarial relationship between management and labor was absolutely deadly. I think it was absolutely deadly. And I think the best thing that has happened is when unions started to work with management.
Even though in the early days that was necessary because labor was really taking advantage.
I agree. But it changed. But the workforce, the management perspectives changed, and
they were forced to change.
They were forced to change. But in those industries, and I'm going to say electronics because that's where I came up. Unions couldn't get a toehold, or they had a very hard time getting a toehold. Why? Well, because the electronics company, which fairly new industry at that time. They were already paying good wages, and they had good benefits, and they had nice workplaces, and so on and so forth. So union would come, and I remember unions trying to get into our shop, and everybody's going like, so we're going to pay you how much a month to be a union member, and you're going to give us, and how's that different from what is like? Well, nobody was interested, right?
If the market is efficient, you don't necessarily need advocacy, but if it's not, you do.
Yeah.
That's really
well, and then the problem is that once it's in place, I think the problem is once management started changing, now you've got people forget a union is a business.
Yeah.
A union doesn't, I mean, ideally what a union would want would be for their goal to succeed and for management to be enlightened and without any coercion to treat their employees properly.
Right.
But if that happened, what would happen to the union?
Right, it'd go away.
It would go away.
Yeah, exactly.
So do they want that? No, they don't want that. Okay.
Let me ask you about another one.
My opinion.
No, I think you're exactly right. Let me ask you about another one, because this is one that's really relevant to what our audience is. Auditors versus auditees. And in this case, what I'm really talking about more broadly is those that develop and implement standards versus those that use them. What are the benefits of kind of a somewhat of an adversarial relationship versus more of a partnership in that realm?
Ugh.
I mean, I can see benefits I can see where that would fall in the spectrum.
Well, I mean, if it's the adversarial part of it is, I believe you need to be pushed sometimes in the right direction, even when it comes to standards, is because sometimes there are good ideas out there, and a standard comes along trying to, a process approach, risk-based thinking. Those are good ideas, okay? And sometimes, unless you push them, in other words, I have to be ISO 9000 registered, so therefore I'm going to have to do this with this process approach and risk-based thinking, but those are good ideas. And so being pushed, and I think of that as kind of an adversarial relationship. Oh, I'm going to have to do this because you're making me. In that case, I think it's a good thing. The partnership bit, I think you start getting into trouble because you get too cozy. Then it's like, Well,
but what I mean by that more is a broader approach to, is there enough? Is there enough user feedback into the standard making process? Are users considered enough? Is it maybe too adversarial?
Some would, yeah, exactly. Some would say no.
Okay.
Some would say that the user isn't considered. I mean, I've heard both sides of this. Some where the user, they wrote this standard. Did anybody really know how a company does business? Right, exactly. Right. You've heard that. But I've also heard from the people on the standard side.
We should have Mike McLean on here.
We had Mike McLean on here not too long ago. We've had Denise Robitaille, and I've talked to people who have been on tags, and they say, no, look, we really try to get people from industry either onto a tag or we consult with them, we talk to them, we try to understand what's going on in that industry, so the standard does make sense. Does that always succeed? I think sometimes no.
Yeah.
And I think it does evolve over time. I mean, I think the ISO 9001 standard definitely has improved from check off the box to now actually, something that makes sense, looking at your process and looking at your risks and opportunities, that makes a lot more sense in terms of how good companies have always been run.
Yeah.
A well-run company has always used a process approach, and they've always looked at risks and opportunities. Now it's just codified in the case of a standard, which shows actually the evolution of the standard, but based on this partnership with industry.
And the
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's interesting that we have this idea in politics and in the legal system, but it also really, even though we think it doesn't, it really applies to business as well. I think is the takeaway there.
Yep.
Good job, Dirk. You always bat it right back to me, man. I don't think I do as good when you give them to me, but we'll see what you do next time.
Mike Richmond.
There you go.
On the set.
It's your turn.
It's my turn.
Oh, there you go.
Dirk, wrap up and close.
That's right.
All right, thanks all of you for joining. And if I didn't do that, I'd probably forget.
You would forget.
I
yeah.
would forget, except just on the prompter.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks all of you for joining us today. Thanks for Gordon Stiles
Yeah,
for joining us and telling us a little bit about what's going on at Star Rapid and business in China.
That's right.
And we'll see you all next Friday.
Have a good weekend.